Grazie al professor Taddio, grazie a tutti e a tutte voi di essere qui oggi e ovviamente non posso che dirmi felicissimo di poter ospitare qui oggi il professor Daniel Dor. Non avrei mai pensato che fosse così facile portarlo a Udine e invece è stato di una grandissima gentilezza e disponibilità a venire qui da noi. E devo dire, Daniel Dor è un linguista, un semiologo, un teorico del linguaggio fra i maggiori e più importanti al mondo. Dopo il suo PhD in linguistica alla Stanford University è stato professore presso l'Università di Tel Aviv, dove credo sia adesso professore emerito in questo momento. È ampiamente riconosciuto a livello internazionale per i suoi studi sul linguaggio, mente e società. Utilizza un approccio interdisciplinare, soprattutto collegato alla biologia e alla linguistica, all'antropologia cognitiva, alla teoria darwiniana, e in questo importanti sono i suoi lavori con Eva Jablonka, no? Una delle più importanti teoriche dell'evoluzione, dove ha riportato in auge la teoria del linguaggio combinata con la teoria dell'evoluzione darwiniana. Quindi riflettendo su questa complessa relazione coevolutiva culturale del linguaggio. La definizione di linguaggio da cui parte Dor e che io trovo particolarmente illuminante anche per il mio lavoro all'interno della filosofia del linguaggio è quella del linguaggio come una tecnologia socialmente costruita per l'istruzione dell'immaginazione. Ora, questa definizione così icastica comporta una serie di conseguenze filosofiche straordinariamente importanti. Quindi cosa significa? A un primo livello significa che quando parliamo noi non trasferiamo contenuti da una mente all'altra, ma diamo istruzioni affinché l'interlocutore costruisca nella propria immaginazione la sua versione mentale dell'esperienza che vogliamo comunicare. Quindi è una tecnologia sociale, cioè richiede, presuppone, parte dal fatto che esista una società, esistono dei rapporti sociali, esista una complessità di problemi a cui una tecnologia comunicativa deve rispondere. Quindi il linguaggio non è un codice, come spesso abbiamo imparato anche studiando all'università. Non mettiamo idee nelle parole, ma le parole sono quelle che guidano i nostri processi immaginativi. Il contesto nel quale parliamo non è un accessorio, ma è esattamente la parte integrante del nostro sistema di istruzioni. Parlare quindi significa attivare l'immaginazione altrui. Questo è il nucleo della teoria di Dor. Non è più un trasferimento di dati, direi, ma una co-costruzione mentale. Cioè il linguaggio si fa costruendolo in un insieme di menti che collaborano a questo tipo di impresa. Per quanto riguarda per appunto la filosofia, una posizione di questo genere ci permette di considerare il linguaggio da una prospettiva di filosofia della tecnologia, cioè di cominciare a considerare la tecnica, la tecnologia, non come qualcosa che l'essere umano ha, ma come qualcosa che l'essere umano è. Cioè noi siamo degli enti immediatamente tecnologici. La tecnologia è il nostro stile, la nostra cifra, il nostro modo di stare al mondo, il nostro modo che abbiamo trovato per cavarcela nel corso dell'evoluzione. E questo in un corso come quello di filosofia e trasformazione digitale è un'intuizione importantissima, perché per esempio ci permette di superare la malposta dicotomia, per esempio, tra i linguaggi naturali e quelli artificiali, cioè l'idea che ci sia una profonda minaccia da parte dell'intelligenza artificiale rispetto a quelle che sono le nostre capacità naturali, biologiche, essenzialmente solamente umane. E invece ci permette di capire che c'è una linea di continuità nelle tecnologie del linguaggio, una linea di continuità che unisce proprio le prime verbalizzazioni degli esseri umani primitivi comparse circa 80-100.000 anni fa con i moderni sistemi di comunicazione e di simulazione del linguaggio naturale. Ma io non sto più nella pelle, sono molto curioso di sapere quelle che sono le novità che ha da raccontarci Daniel Dor, perché ieri sera ci anticipava che voleva illustrarci quelle che sono le nuove, le ultime acquisizioni del suo lavoro. Questo testo, che è The Instruction of Imagination, che a breve uscirà anche in italiano, mi dispiace che non siamo riusciti con i tempi a farlo uscire in occasione di questo incontro, ma è un testo che ha 10 anni, no? È stato pubblicato in inglese 10 anni fa, e in questi ultimi 10 anni Daniel Dor ha continuato a lavorare su questi temi, ha lavorato in maniera incredibilmente interessante, per esempio su un tema a me molto caro, che è quello della menzogna e dell'utilità della menzogna nell'evoluzione, nella costruzione del linguaggio, e quindi io non posso che ringraziarlo ancora una volta e cedergli immediatamente la parola. Grazie.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I would like to thank Damiano, Andrea, Sala, Giacomo, and all the other people who have been involved in this wonderful event, and especially on the effort of the translation of the book into Italian. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to have my book being published in the language of some of the intellectuals that I most admire, like Dante, like Vico, like Croce, and others. A wonderful experience for me. What I would like to do, can I move a little bit backwards? I think so. So what I would like to do today is indeed talk about language and the instruction of imagination, but that's going to be the end of the lecture in a way, because I would like to give you a sketch of a much bigger picture within which the story of language makes a different sense. And the bigger picture is about the evolution of humanity from around 2 million years ago until today. And the thing that I think, for me, is becoming clearer and clearer, the thing that characterizes our nature, human nature, much more than other ideas that have been dominant in the past, like the idea of our cognitive capacity, our individual cognitive capacity as the most important thing. And I'm going to talk about communication, and I'm going to talk about that thing called collaborative computation that I will explain in a minute. And the story of language, its evolution and its significance in our life will be kind of brought into the story at the historical moment that I think it appears, with some, I hope, surprising consequences. So because the story that I want to tell is a big story, I would like to start by zooming in on something very, very specific. And the thing that I would like to zoom in on is the pointing gesture, just this thing where I point to you at the coat hanger there, and you guys look at where I pointed. Here's the situation in schematic form where we have A and B, two individuals, and A points, that's the P, at an object O for B to look at, right? A very, very fundamental human thing. And what's most important about pointing from the general point of view is that animals do not point, only humans point. So we have a very, very clear example of something that marks our uniqueness among the animal kingdom. So how do we usually think about pointing? We usually think about pointing in terms of the relationships between A and B and the object that we're pointing at. And the way we usually think about that is in terms of, one, information sharing. By pointing at something, I share some information with you, O. Or at a lower level, more fundamental level, we think about pointing as a way of constructing shared intentionality, because after I point at something to you and you look at that, we are in a situation where I know that you know and you know that I know, and so on. But the fact of the matter is that all this talk about information sharing and shared intentionality has not happened yet in our little thing here, because B is still looking at A and A is pointing. B does not see O yet, right? What is happening here? What is happening with the pointing gesture itself is actually that A instructs B where to look, all right? Which means that the pointing gesture, as opposed to the way we've characterized it through the years, is a very interesting gesture in the sense that it has two messages, one on top of the other. The first message says, look where I'm pointing. Only the second message says, if you look there, you'll see the coat hanger, right? So whenever I will talk about instructive communication in this talk, we are going to talk about this type of messaging where a gesture tells you two things to do, all right? As opposed to, say, a bark by a dog that just tells you something. There's one message. Here we have two messages. And if you think about what is happening here, the B has to comply with the first part of the message and to look in the right direction in order to get the message of the pointer, right? If you think about it in terms of like our eyes, think about our eyes as two cameras located here. If I point at something and you look at that direction, it's almost as if you let me move your camera in the angle that I want them to move. So there is a slight moment in which the autonomy of your visual perception is reduced and you allow me to play with your eyes to move them from one side to the other, all right? Now think about A and B walking together in the wood, pointing at things to each other, and you'll see that what you get there is much more than shared intentionality. Sure, it happens. They know that each other knows, but they become a unit of collaborative computation of all the different types of computations involved in perception, right? So what does our mind do? Our mind looks around, tries to detect things, tries to interpret those things, tries to predict what's going to happen, tries to understand what to do, how to react to what we see. As long as we do it by ourselves, all the computations take place inside the single brain that is the brain of the person. Once these two individuals are doing it together, we have constructed a collaborative unit of visual perception, all right? And I would just like very briefly to say two things about this collaborative unit. It doesn't just double the capacity of these two people, right? It's not just like 4 eyes instead of 2, because A and B are different from each other. So, for example, A may detect certain things that B would not see, and B would be able to detect some things that A wouldn't see. So we get different levels of detection from two people who are different from each other. Or think about a situation where A sees something but doesn't know what it is, doesn't understand what it is, all right? B doesn't see that. But once A shows the thing to B, B can tell what this is. So together they have managed to solve a problem that none of them would be able to solve by themselves. All right? So what I'm going to try to say is the unique property of the human species is the ability to engage in collaborative computations of different types, and that happens as a result of the fact that we've developed tools for instruction. And here we have the instruction of the senses by pointing, and later on I will say language is a tool for the instruction of imagination, and it works exactly the same way, just with respect to imagination. That's the basic story that I want to tell you about today. So, we've zoomed in onto the pointing, to the gesture of pointing. Now let's zoom out and talk about the question of human uniqueness, all right? So a minute of introduction. Of course, you all know that. For a very, very long time, the view of human uniqueness was cognitive and qualitative. The idea was what makes us different from the other animals is what is happening inside the individual human mind, brain, whichever way you want to call it. Throughout most of history, it was called soul. So the soul, the mind, the brain, pick your choice. But basically, we're different from the animals because of what is happening inside the skull. And it's qualitative in the sense that we have capacities, most importantly language and rationality, which the other animals do not, which means that we're different from them in a qualitative, cognitive way. Ever since Darwin, as people delve deeper and deeper into the understanding of animal cognitive life, animal social life, and so on and so forth, we have a different view, as far as I'm concerned, on a different level of success than the first one. It's a knockout. And this view says we do have the difference is cognitive, it is about the mind, but the difference is quantitative and not qualitative in the sense that every capacity that we have has its roots in some precursors in the animal world where we can do something to a larger extent than they do, but they also have those capacities. And once you think in this way, thinking about the evolution of the humankind in evolutionary terms becomes much easier because you have precursors in the other animals for things that could evolve and develop. Basically, my suggestion, what I'm trying to kind of, the message that I'm trying to get across is that there is a third option. And the third option brings us back to a qualitative distinction between us and animals, but gets the distinction out of the individual brain. Because the idea is that animals, which are much cleverer than we ever thought, still do all the cognitive computations inside their own mind. Every animal is an individualistic thinker, just like, we sometimes say we wish we had more individualistic thinkers. Animals are individualistic thinkers in the real deep sense, whereas what has happened to us is that we morphed from a set of individuals, each thinking by itself, to a group of people, to a community, where we share the burden of computation between us, having divisions of labor, thinking together, asking questions, giving advice, telling stories, educating, and so on and so forth. So basically, the right way to describe human life is actually in terms of a network, a social network of collaborative computation, where we individually find ourselves as nodes on the network, still partially independent, as opposed, I will say that in parentheses, still partially independent as opposed, for example, to the social insects, where in social insects decisions are made collectively without as far as we can tell, different individuals making serious contributions to that. We're in a situation that is hybrid, let's say, and that's a result of our evolutionary dynamic, but we have become nodes on a social network of collaborative computation. And I would like to very quickly take you through a short sketch of a few points regarding this change, having to do with a lot of the observations that people have made in the last century about the differences and similarities between people, humans, and animals. So, for example, we used to think social learning is something that only we do. Now we know very, very well that so many animals are engaged in serious social learning, learning from each other how to do things, all right? But still, if you look at the Rubicon that is separating between us and them, you can see that in the animals, there is one side, the learner, B, and there's one side of the knower, A, and B learns from A. A doesn't have to be involved in the process of B learning, right? When you look at humans, what you see is teaching, education. You see a situation where both A and B are involved together through instructive communication in the process of B's learning, all right? Think about cooperation. We used to think we are the only cooperating species. No, animals cooperate in an enormous number of amazing ways. But cooperation is still founded on individualistic computation on both sides. So when A and B, two wolves, are engaged in collective hunting, and one of them goes to the right and one of them goes to the left in order to zoom in on the prey, we know that there's no prior planning or communication through the hunt that says you go here, I go here. You just go there because that's what you decided to do. I see you, I see the prey, I make my estimate, I go from the right. There's an enormous amount of stuff that can be done cooperatively without the two sides talking about it. When you look at our side of the Rubicon in humans, we plan together before, we talk about it throughout to manage what we do, and then eventually we sit down to talk about what happened, get all kinds of conclusions. We are hunting as a social network as opposed to a group of individuals hunting together, right? Think about information sharing. Many, many animals have the capacity for alarm calls. When there's a snake or another predator, there's a specific sound signal that animals make to warn everybody else. That's very interesting. That's information sharing about, among animals. But think again about it and you'll see that if A sees the snake and emits the call, and B hears the call and looks for the snake, there's no communication between them. There's nothing that they do together. A emits the call and goes on his business. B hears the call and goes on his business. Okay? When we walk around on a hill together with us and suddenly somebody here sees a snake, right? And cries snake, we all look at that person and ask where? And the person points, so the detection and the behavior that comes after it from the first act of information sharing is collaborative. We do it together. And finally, everybody knows this is one of the great discoveries of modern animal science. Everybody knows that the apes, the great apes, have theory of mind. Theory of mind means that they are capable, as opposed to most animals, of making guesses about what's happening in the other person's mind, which is very, very important. But it is still an individualistic task, because if I look at you and I ask myself what you're going to do, there's still no communication between us about that. You're doing your own business. You should not even be aware of the fact that I'm looking at you and trying to guess you, and I'm doing all the computations by myself. When you look across the Rubicon at our lives, you see that we do not just guess what's happening in the other person's mind. We talk about it, we tell each other, we ask questions, and so on and so forth. So in all these ways, you can see the combination of, on the one hand, a gradual dynamic from lower cognitive capacities to better cognitive capacities, but you can also see the qualitative leap from individualistic computation to collaborative computation. And that's the story, as far as I'm concerned, of the uniqueness of the human species. Now, when we look at the evolution of collaborative computation, in the evolutionary history of humans, I would like to suggest that we have two stages that we need to talk about in this process. And here I will say in parentheses, actually many more stages, leading all the way to digital transformations of today. But I'm going to talk, evolutionarily speaking, about the two main first steps of this collaborative capacity. And I will remind you what I said before. Whenever we engage in collaborative computation, we need instructive communication. All right? So again, in parentheses, look at the structure of distributed computation that makes the internet alive, that makes every big computational project today alive. Tens of thousands of computers connected to each other, doing their work together, giving each other tasks, collecting the data again, all the stuff that's happening below the internet at the level of actual computers. And you'll see that this is exactly what's happening. The computers send each other instructive communication messages. All right? Here's the data. Here's what I need to do with it. Bring me back your result. Here's the data for you. Give me back the result, and so on and so forth. We do exactly the same thing, but we obviously have to change the order of the sentence. Computers do it today because we've already done that very, very long ago. So there are two systems, and as opposed to what we've always thought about when we thought about language as the system that started a new era in our lives, actually language in this story is the second stage. The first stage is the system that we call mimesis. Merlin Donald, a cognitive scientist, developmental psychologist, very, very important from Canada, already in the 90s of the last century, directed our attention to the fact that there is this whole system of gestures that we use that are unique to us. We always think like there's ape communication. Just a sec. There's ape communication, and then there's language. No, there's something in the middle. There's a missing link. And Donald told us what this link was. And mimesis is a toolkit. And it has pointing. We started with pointing before. And it has manual and bodily demonstration. I show you how to do stuff. Okay? So for example, if there's a very complex knot that I want to teach you how to make, if I try to tell you in words and put my hands behind my back, won't work. This is the most efficient way. We do that, animals do not do that. It includes miming and pantomime. It includes vocalizations that are mimetic. It includes, very, very importantly, this curious fact about us that we look each other in the eye for approval or disapproval. I can look at you now and say, okay, some people I see are interested, some people are not, what's happening, some people are confused, all on the basis of the eyes. Animals look each other in the eye in hostile situations. We have changed the meaning of eye contact to play a role in the big game of collaborative computation. And mimesis basically, probably, we can't tell that with 100%, but it makes perfect sense theoretically, also included music and dance and ritual all those things that we use that are pre-linguistic. All right? Now, how do we know that all this is pre-linguistic? That is one of the easiest parts in all this complex story, because we know that language depends on mimesis. When we look at children acquiring language, there's no way a child will acquire language without first being able to point and understand pointing, make gestures, demonstrate all kinds of things, make the mimes of the sounds of animals, and so on and so forth. Language acquisition is a process that it does not just happen out of context, it happens based on a system that is older, more ancient evolutionarily, and more ancient and older developmentally. Children are able to get there, and then based on that, based on pointing, we can start naming things, and so on. So it's quite obvious that mimesis came first, all right? And once you get mimesis, and you get the systematic instruction of the senses and of the body, where people can start showing things to people, teaching them how to do things, getting them into the mood of social cohesion, and many, many, many other things, transfer information, communicate about what to do. Mimesis is changing our condition, the human condition, in the most profound way, because it's taken us from a situation in which we've been for hundreds of millions of years of private experiencing, where each of us experiences by himself or herself, like an old PC standing on the table, not connected to any other machines. It's taking us to the next stage of collaborative experiencing. All right, we are experiencing on all the relevant levels. We are experiencing together. And the beautiful thing about this whole thing with mimesis is that when we look at the trajectory of human evolution, we see around 2 million years ago a jump. We see that something has changed. We see that the evolutionary business model has morphed into something else. Because around 2 million years ago, we start seeing fire, and we start seeing cooking, and we start seeing a stone tool factory with all kinds of innovations. And we start seeing big game hunting, the hunting of big animals. Individuals can hunt small animals. To hunt the bigger animals, you need collaborative work. We see signs of alloparenting, that is, other individuals than the mother are engaged in the raising of the children, and all kinds of things like that, all right? And the beautiful thing is that once we look at the effort involved in creating such a culture with fire, with wood, and so on, one thing is becoming very, very clear. It's not the case that each individual of that period in the community, right, collected his or her own wood, put fire to it, went out to hunt, went out to gather, came back, cooked the whole thing, and ate it. There was division of labor. Different people began to do different things. The whole effort involved there is exactly the kind of thing that you can achieve with your mimetic tools. And I don't know if you know of this game, what's the word? The game of charades, that's right, the game of charades, where you're not allowed to speak and then you have to show stuff like that. It's a very interesting game, evolutionarily speaking, because what it does is it tells us you can't use your newest technology, language, your newer technology, go back to your former technology, and then we realize that if we now have to engage in practical challenges of building ourselves a community here, finding food, finding wood, arranging the fire, living together and all that, we can basically do that only with mimesis. If we're somehow not allowed to speak, we can do that with mimesis, and the best way to realize that is to find yourself in a situation where there's a practical thing that you have to do with somebody else, but you don't share a language. So, for example, on construction sites, where you have people working, coming from different places and almost no common language, you can all of a sudden see how mimesis is coming back to life and how you can achieve so much with all this. All right? So we are moving from individual experiencing to collaborative experiencing, and we're building a community that is already a network of collaborative computation being managed by the tool of instructive communication, which allows us to instruct each other's senses. All right? But mimesis, as a tool for collaborative computation, has one serious limit, and that is the limit that says that if I cannot show something to your senses, there's no way to communicate about what I want. So think about a situation where all of a sudden this door opens and a big lion comes in, all right? There's no problem from the moment we can all see the lion. It's in our angle of vision for me or for anybody else to point and say lion, and then we all get very scared and everything else. But to the extent that I saw a lion outside a minute ago, and I want to tell you here that there's a lion outside, that's going to be very, very difficult because I don't have anything to point at, all right? And basically, in a kind of mimetic culture, I would start making noises about a lion when there's no lion here, and you'd hospitalize me, you know, with that guy sitting by the fire who has done nothing for the last 2 months. If we want to go beyond the here and now of mimetic communication, there's only one way to do that. That's language. And here I say again in parentheses that there are already many more ways to do that, but these are the results of a technological revolution of the last 100 years, and we are no longer there. But we are not there yet. But basically at that time, and we're thinking, me and my colleagues, we're not thinking about 100,000 years ago. We're thinking more in terms of 500,000 years ago for all kinds of reasons. The beginning of a process that probably ended 100,000 years ago. So language is taking us the next stage. And now we can see how language takes us the next stage. The idea is pretty simple. Just like mimetic communication instructs our senses, language is a tool that allows us to go deeper, send a longer hand deep into the other person's computational dynamics, and actually instruct our imagination. All right, so now 2 things. When I talk about imagination, there are as many interpretations of this term as there are people interested in it. What I'm talking about basically is the most foundational thing, and that is we have memories, all right, that we store based on our experiences. Imagination is the capacity that we have to recombine them and to create an internal experience that is based on this recombination, all right? So you know, think about, you have experiences of dogs and cats and newspapers and the activity of sitting and the activity of reading. All these you have experiences of, but you've never seen a dog and a cat sitting together reading a newspaper. I can assure you that. But imagination is exactly what allows us to raise this thought, because we take these little pieces and we arrange them in a different way. And that is basically what language does. If you think about a sentence as a minimal unit, it is a code, it is a piece of code that basically instructs the listener in the process of imagining the message instead of actually looking at it or having direct perceptual exposure to it, right? And the way this is done is actually quite simple, much, much simpler than many current theories of language make it look. And that's a major issue here, because once we realize that language is a technology that was invented and began to develop hundreds of thousands of years ago, all right, there must be something very simple about it, all right? It cannot function the way computers work. It has to be something very, very intuitive. And the intuition says the following. I have two things in my sentence. I have the morphemes, the words and their parts, and each of them is already connected in our minds to experiential clusters that connected to them when we were this is one of the most amazing things, in my mind. Each and every one of us here has gone through the very, very same event in 1,000 ways, in which we have never yet seen a dog, and then an adult walks with us, and all of a sudden we see a dog, and the adult points and says dog. So for the first time, there is a connection between the word and that experience, all right? The morpheme dog, when I give you the sentence, a dog and a cat were sitting outside reading a newspaper, when I say the word dog, this is an instruction to you to get experiences of dogs, prototypical experiences of dogs from your long-term memory, right? And every morpheme tells you to pick up something, right? And then if you see the grammar of my sentence, the syntax and the morphology, what they basically do is tell you how to arrange those experiential clusters with respect to each other, so that if everything works right, you'll get an imagined experience inside your mind that will be similar enough to what I experienced for me to feel that I've given you a message that you understood. All right? So once we start using this system, once we begin to use our mimetic capacities in order to create a new technology that allows us to instruct the imagination of the other, we are changing the human condition again in a very, very foundational way, because we started as individualistic experiencers with a limited capacity for imagination. We know that animals do have some capacity for imagination, time travel, and stuff like that. We have then gone through 1.5 million years of morphing the human condition into a state of a community based on collaborative experiencing, building all those revolutionary things that, from fire to big game hunting and so on, that has created a new type of human life, a new business model for survival, in which the entity responsible for survival is the community. And our own individualistic survival is based on our contribution to the collaborative effort, which has an enormous amount of implications for other issues. And then, based on the flourishing and the establishment of a life based on collaborative experiencing, we have gone another stage, created collaborative imagination, and began to create yet another level of collaborative computation that is based on our ability to work with each other's imaginations on many different levels. All right? There's an enormous amount of implications of this, but I would just like to highlight one and then say a few words about that. As long as I experience by myself, everything that I know or think that I know is based on what I have experienced. All right? when we move from that situation to a situation where we experience collaboratively, I may be made to experience something by other people in the group. You point at something, you show me how to do it, and so on. But eventually, I experience it myself too, right? Which means that in both cases, I'm still in a situation where my decision-making processes are based on my own experiences. With the instruction of imagination, we are all of a sudden in a completely new situation, where I start to bring into my decision-making processes pieces of information that I have not experienced myself, pieces of information that I got from other people who've instructed my imagination, either based on their experiences or based on the experiences of a third person who told them, and so on and so forth. So we're changing something very, very fundamental in terms of the notions of knowledge, truth, experience, and all that kind of stuff. And eventually, we find ourselves in a totally new level of epistemic fragility. All right? We know much more working together. We believe much more working together. We can do much more working together. But as long as we move along this dynamic, with each step, and especially this step, we're giving up on some kind of self-evident understanding of the truth of things, and actually, and that's another topic that I talk about in my book, the decline in epistemic fragility that comes with the instruction of imagination is actually the birthplace of the question of truth and of the philosophical search for truth, because it is only when we start instructing each other's imagination that we get to a point where I have to ask myself, you told me something. Maybe you were wrong, maybe you didn't see well. How can I tell if I wasn't there? Or maybe even worse, maybe you're lying to me and I have no way to understand that or to know that because I'm not experiencing it myself. You know the expression, I will believe it when I see it. This is a very, very deep saying that kind of tracks our evolutionary dynamic in one phrase, because for hundreds of thousands of years, I believed it because I saw it. There was no other way, all right? With language, I have to believe it based on trust in your judgment. It's a very, very, very complex kind of situation, and if we think about the problems that you guys are interested in terms of the epistemic anxiety brought about by digital culture, by the digital culture, for me, this is just a continuation of the same kind of thing. A few more words on the evolutionary dynamics before we finish. The question of the origin of language, historically speaking, people have been interested in this question for a very, very long time. In some ways since antiquity. And the question has always been framed as the question of the origin of the system itself, the origin of language. There was no language, then there was language. All right? Most of history, the answer was very, very simple. We had no language, then God gave us language. We're very happy to have received it. In the Bible, we didn't have to wait for too long because Adam was already born with the innate capacity for language. So when God and Adam and Eve talk to each other in the first chapter, there's no line that says, and then Adam sat down to learn God's language. It was just innate, and the innateness hypothesis about language has continued since then until Chomsky and other people to play a very important role in our discussions. Once we think about language as the second system, inside a development that began with mimesis, where individuals and communities learn deeply how to engage in collaborative computation, we can do something different. Instead of looking for an explanation of how the system emerged, we can start asking how individuals who are full-fledged mimetic communicators could have started to use the old system for a new function. So the lion again, right? We said if there's a lion inside, it's all going to be fine. I'm going to point at the lion and you're going to all be saying, thank you, Daniel, for noticing the lion. Suppose that I saw a lion outside and I'm coming in and I'm starting to shout lion, lion, all right? And instead of sending me to be looked at, because we've already developed trust for 1.5 million years, and because we know each other much better than before, and because we've already constructed a life on a network, at least some of you managed to understand that I'm trying to show you mimetically that there's a lion there. That's not a huge step. It's a big step, but it's not a huge step. It's not like, how does it happen that there's no language and then all of a sudden there is full-fledged language? This is a rather small step. Once somebody realizes that I'm trying to point at the lion that's not inside the room, we have a first instance of the instruction of imagination. Because instead of seeing the lion, you have to imagine that there's a lion outside, which means that my old mimetic gesture has become a tool for the instruction of imagination. And once we can see beginnings of stuff like that, we can now think differently about the entire dynamic that brought us from those very, very small primitive beginnings to languages as they are, because there now is a new function, the instruction of imagination, and we as a community are trying all kinds of ways to raise the level of success in the instruction of imagination, right? And in the book, you will see a detailed description of how that may have happened. I will just give you a hint, one hint. Mimetic vocalizations are analog in the sense that if I shout lion or I say there's a lion outside, there's a difference in meaning, a very interesting and important difference in meaning. If I want to instruct your imagination, it's becoming imperative that you and I will recognize the same word in the same way because you don't have the thing to look at. So we get all kinds of processes of phonetization, of vocalizations, of semanticization, of analog meanings, and so on, and eventually all kinds of syntactic configurations that we use in order to be able to avoid misunderstandings and ambiguities and so on and so forth. So there's a whole different way of thinking about it evolutionarily, where language, full-fledged language, the way we know it, only really emerges at the end of the evolutionary process, say 100,000 years ago. But for hundreds of thousands of years, human communities experiment with more primitive versions, prototypes of the system, try to work with it, see the kinds of problems that emerge, solve them, and so on. And I will say in parentheses, as long as you think about language as a cognitive capacity, there's no way to talk about it like this. Once you think about it as technology, you can say, hey, there are generations of cell phones. And how did these generations emerge? First there was a prototype, then people started using, saw all kinds of problems, needed more things, developed the second layer, and so on. the very same thing we can think about when we think about language as a technology. Its evolution is a cultural evolution of technologies. All right? And what happens when we think about it this way, we get this wonderful co-evolutionary spiral, a picture of a spiraling dynamics in which everything evolves together with everything else. And the three important elements here are the technology itself. Think about you have a community that is based on mimesis, and now they're starting to use the first prototype, right? So then the first prototype begins to get better in all kinds of ways. Together with that, society changes because language brings in a lot of new stuff, not just at the level of imagination, but at the most practical stuff. There are so many more things that we can do together with language as opposed to mimesis. And individual cognitions also get into this spiraling dynamics because throughout the process, from the beginning until today, the linguistically based collaborative network of the community becomes the selection environment for individuals. So the capacity to manage, to learn how to participate in the social dynamics of language becomes one of the challenges for individuals, especially for small children, and it's becoming a more and more pressing demand over individuals to be able to participate in that, so that if you think about generation 1, and then generation 100, and then generation 300, you will see at generation 1 a certain level of variability cognitively, a certain societal situation, and a certain state of the technology. By generation 100, the language will be much more developed, society will be much more changed and based on language, and individuals who have been selected for 100 generations to participate will be much more adapted to the usage of the technology so that they can now develop the technology to the next level, and so on and so forth. It's a spiral that never ends, and in many, many ways, it just continues until today. And one more sentence about that. We talked about the instruction of the senses. Then we talked about the instruction of imagination. Try to think about the future developments here. After we have full-fledged instruction of imagination, humans invent painting and the visual arts. What is it? It's going back to mimesis, to the instruction of the senses, but this time without the constraints of the here and now, right? So we've managed to create a collaborative network that is wider because not everybody has to be in the same place. After that, humans begin to invent writing and reading. What is that? That is going back to the instruction of imagination, just we don't have to be in the same room to talk to each other. Now we can be away from each other. And if you think about the dynamic that starts with mimesis, language, visual arts, reading and writing, and then you start adding the radio and television and the internet and social networks and everything, you'll see that it's all the same kind of dynamic where the extent of the collaborative network is being pushed to the sides. It's becoming more and more extensive, with all the problems that come with it, like epistemic fragility and so on. And last point. We used for most of history to think about humans as superiors to animals. And there is no doubt that the move from individualistic computation to collaborative computation through mimesis, language, and all the rest of these things has allowed us to get to the point where we are today with cameras and lectures and all that, where the animals basically still live in nature, in the way we lived a few millions years ago. But once you think about human evolution this way, you see that our evolutionary trajectory is the most peculiar and strange that you can think of, because social insects very, very early have gone for the collaborative thing, and they are doing the collaborative thing. Other animals, all the other animals, are doing the individualistic thing. We have become full-fledged individualistic computers for hundreds of thousands of years, and then 2 million years we started morphing into individuals living in collaborative networks of mimesis, and then we made another change and got into this whole imagination thing, which means that who we are now, as a result of a very peculiar line of development, is also to some significant sense fragile. Fragile epistemically, fragile emotionally, fragile in terms of the relationship between the individual and the group, all kinds of things like that. And one of my hopes in terms of like what I would like people to start thinking about as a result of this perspective is that maybe some of the deep emotional problems that are unique to humans, just like all the other unique things, we also have a whole package of serious problems that the animals do not share. This is also the result of the very peculiar way we have evolved and changed from full individuals to partial individuals who are also nodes on the network and all that complexity. And maybe out of this evolutionary perspective, we can also find ways to understand better what is happening to people who are not finding the right ways to struggle with this very peculiar situation we have arrived at. Thank you very much.
Thank you.